It starts with a sip of cold water, a single mouthful, nothing unusual, and then a sharp, bright jolt of pain fires through one tooth, right where the tooth meets the gum. It fades in a second or two. So, it gets ignored. Until it happens again. Cold air on a winter morning, a spoonful of ice cream, a breath in through the mouth. Same tooth, same spot. That same electric jolt. And then one day, the tongue finds something. Run it along the gum line of that sensitive tooth, and there is a groove there now. A little step, a ledge that was never there before. A fingernail catches on it. In the mirror, under the right light, it shows as a small notch cut into the tooth right at the gum. Something is being felt. Something is being seen. The tooth is not smooth anymore, and it is not just tender. It is physically changing. Most people assume the worst and reach for the same explanation. It must be a cavity. So they book the appointment, they sit in the chair, they brace for the drill, and then they hear something that makes no sense at all. There is no cavity. The tooth is fine. And yet the pain is absolutely real. The notch is absolutely there, appearing and slowly deepening on a tooth that supposedly has nothing wrong with it. Here is what almost no one is told in that moment. That jolt is not coming from decay. That notch is not a sign of poor brushing, and neither one will be fixed by scrubbing harder or switching toothpaste. Both are coming from something happening to the structure of the tooth itself at its most vulnerable point, driven by a force most people cannot feel and have never once thought to blame. This video is about that force, what it is, where it comes from, and why it quietly destroys the neck of the tooth while everyone is looking in the wrong place. Start with the notch itself because it has a name, and the name rules out the usual suspect immediately. Dentists call it a non-carious cervical lesion. Non-carious means exactly that. Not decay, nothing is rotting. It is solid tooth structure that has been physically lost from the neck of the tooth, the narrow band where the white crown meets the gum. That is why you can see it in the mirror, and why you can feel it with the tip of your tongue. And the sensitivity comes from the same place, for a reason described back in 1972 by Martin Brandstrom, in what became known as the hydrodynamic theory. Underneath the hard enamel is a softer layer called dentin, and dentin is not solid. It is packed with thousands of microscopic tubules, tiny channels running inward toward the nerve. When a notch carves through the enamel and exposes that dentin, those channels open to the outside world. A rush of cold, a puff of air, the sweep of a brush sends the fluid inside those tubules moving, and the nerve reads that sudden movement as a stab of pain. So the notch and the jolt are not two problems. They are one. A protective layer that used to be there is simply gone. The question that actually matters is what removed it. For decades, there were two easy answers: brushing too hard, and acid wearing the surface down. Both are real, both can damage a tooth. But neither one ever explained what dentists kept seeing, because these notches appear in people who brush gently. They appear on one tooth and not the tooth right beside it, which met the exact same brush. A toothbrush touches every tooth in the mouth, yet only certain teeth are carved out. The damage was too selective, too targeted, almost as if something were singling out specific teeth on purpose. And in a sense, something was. In 1984, a study by Lee and Ekel in the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry proposed a completely different idea. What if the tooth was not being worn from the outside at all? What if it was being broken from the inside by the force of the bite itself? Here is the mechanism, and it is the heart of this whole thing. A tooth is not a rigid post cemented into the jaw. It has the tiniest amount of flex, and every time the teeth clamp together, the tooth bends microscopically under the load. When it bends, the stress does not spread out evenly across the tooth. It concentrates. It funnels straight down into the thinnest, weakest band of the entire tooth, the neck, right at the gum line, exactly where these notches form. In 1991, in the Journal of Aesthetic Dentistry, John Grippo gave the process a name. He called it abfraction, from the Latin for breaking away. And that is precisely what happens. Under repeated bending, the crystals of enamel and dentin at the neck flex against one another thousands of times a day, until microscopic cracks begin to form. Fragments break loose, a notch appears, and then it deepens. Modern engineering supports the mechanism directly. Using finite element analysis, the same method used to test where a bridge or an aircraft part will crack under load, researchers including J.S. Rees showed again and again that when a bite force lands on a tooth, the stress piles up at exactly the cervical region, exactly where these lesions form. The tooth is not being brushed away, it is being stressed apart. But that raises the real question, the one this whole video is built around. Where does all that force actually come from? And there are two answers, and almost everyone misses both. The first is grinding and clenching, and most of it is completely invisible to the person doing it. Research on sleep bruxism, much of it led by Gilles Levine, has shown that grinding during sleep is tied to brief arousals in the night, and that it rises sharply with stress and disrupted sleep. It happens in the dark, unconsciously, with no memory of it in the morning. A person can generate forces on their teeth while asleep that they would never apply on purpose while awake. And it is not only at night. A huge number of people clench through the day and never notice. Jaw locked in traffic, teeth pressed tight while concentrating at a screen, held together for hours at a time. Teeth were only ever meant to touch for a few minutes of actual chewing across an entire day. Held together far longer than that, night after night and hour after hour, they deliver exactly the kind of relentless, repeated load that abfraction is made of. The sign of it is often written on the teeth themselves, flattened edges, tiny chips, worn tips, a jaw that aches in the morning, all evidence of a force the person never felt. The second source is the bite itself, the way the teeth meet, which dentists call occlusion. In a bite that is perfectly balanced, force is shared across many teeth at once. But bites are rarely perfect. A tooth that sits slightly high, a filling or crown that is a fraction too tall, teeth that are crowded or tipped, an old orthodontic relapse, any of these can send a few teeth taking far more than their share of the load. And when the teeth slide sideways rather than meeting straight on, which is exactly what happens during grinding, the bending force at the neck of the tooth climbs even higher. This is why abfraction so often shows up on just one or two teeth. Those are the teeth carrying the overload. The force is not spread evenly, so the damage is not spread evenly either. Put those two together, a heavy, unconscious clenching habit and a bite that funnels that force onto a few unlucky teeth, and the whole picture finally makes sense. The notch is not random. It is not bad luck. It is the visible record of a specific force landing on a specific weak point, over and over for years. It is worth being honest here, because the concept is still debated. Not every researcher accepts abfraction as a separate, fully proven cause on its own, and much of the strongest evidence comes from laboratory models rather than long human trials. Most experts today describe these cervical lesions as multifactorial, with force, brushing, and acid acting together. But even in that combined view, the force is the part that sets the whole thing in motion, the piece that explains why the damage lands where it lands, and the piece that almost of which leads straight to the part that costs people the most, and the part almost no one sees coming. Because when a notch like this is treated the way most people expect, filled in, smoothed over, made to look normal again, something strange keeps happening. The repair does not last. It works loose. It falls out, and it gets paid for again. And again. The very same force that carved the notch in the first place goes quietly to work on whatever is placed there to cover it, and almost no one is ever told why it keeps happening. That is exactly where this story picks up next time.